This is the Doubtless Podcast, here to help you change from a state of doubt and insecurity towards a more calm, confident, and doubtless self. I'm your host, coach and psychologist Julian, and my guests are remarkable, ambitious humans who share their stories of doubtful moments, of their insecurities, and how that shaped their successes today.
I think we're good to go.
Awesome. I already pressed record, so it's running, but I will be cutting everything that is kind of stupid in the beginning or we want to leave out.
That's not always a good idea. Sometimes it's great. Like I did a podcast once where we just started recording, and you just kind of stumble into a casual, silly conversation, and then the intro comes. It actually works.
Okay. Usually I cut out the kind of silly beginning because of the, organizational stuff that we just talked about. But
but it's kind of like people are like, what's going on here? Oh, that's what's going on here. So it's a little bit funny and intimate. Anyway,
it's a little intriguing in the beginning.
Yeah, it's like, what am I listening to? But you'll make the right choice, I'm sure.
Well, I'll have the script in the end and see. Okay, does it make sense or not?
Exactly.
All right. I'll have usually a short moment of just collecting myself and mindfulness. Just a moment, a couple of breaths to fully align for this conversation. So if you want to join me, I guess you know how to do that.
I've dabbled.
Good morning, Klaus.
Good morning, Julian.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation. We had the pre-chat before every podcast conversation that I have, and that left me a little bit speechless, and I need some time to process what was going on in these 20 minutes that we had. So that makes me very curious about today's conversation. And I want to start off because you have a very intriguing and interesting life story. And from there on, we will go into many different directions that I look forward to. But for now, I want to know what do I need to know in order to understand that you made this life choice or big decision to become a monk for 7 years?
Yeah. Sometimes when people ask that question, I kind of cheekily said that I tried pretty much everything else and failed at it. And so it was the only door left to try, which is not entirely untrue, but maybe also doesn't give the full context. I grew up in Denmark from a well-off background, not ultra rich, but something of an upper middle class, very peaceful suburban experience, upbringing. Did well in school. There's nothing this is just privilege, right? And somehow there was always, I remember this from my earliest memories of childhood, this nagging feeling that something is off. There's something off. It's like that kind of movie thing where almost like a horror movie, there's something lurking or there's something not right here. I saw my parents, they were, they're boomers, and they had these parties and they would drink, and sometimes members of society would come, and I would witness them before the party. They would be like the excitement and all of that, and during the party da 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 da, and then the morning after. So it's like I had this feeling that there are multiple people here. There are like even so-called normal people are almost like split personalities, and it gave me this horrible feeling that I can't trust anything here. And so I tried a lot of subcultures growing up. I started first playing around with computers and taught myself to program at 9 years old or so. And because numbers in, numbers out, you can trust computers much more than you can trust people. And I ended up playing around with it to the point where I was became like a hacker and joined a hacking community. And um, I definitely did not hack the Pentagon, but a friend of mine might have. And I realized that this is like cybercrime is probably not a career path for me, because that's just like I could envision men in suits knocking on the door immediately, and that actually happened to this guy. He got busted.
Ooh.
And of course, today he runs a cybersecurity company,
Of
right?
course, that's the long
course,
story.
right?
Yeah. He figured.
That's the cliche of all
Yeah.
cliches. Yeah. I tried skateboarding, defying gravity, and I have the scars to prove it. I tried extreme left-wing political activism, where you throw rocks at McDonald's on the weekend and have lunch there on Wednesdays. I was a techno DJ in dungeons in Berlin. All these subcultures, and what I found was that no, it actually gets worse. It doesn't get better. Like, these are fringe communities are visited by people who don't feel they fit in. A lot of them have baggage, emotional baggage. And so, sad to say, I felt like the hypocrisy was even bigger in those subcultures, because they feel like they're better, right? We're not like the mainstream. We're not like the boring sheep. Oh, yes, you are. You're even worse, actually. Because in a punk community or a skateboard community where they don't conform, they conform way more. Try showing up at a punk concert in a suit. Not allowed at all, right? There's a specific cigarette brand you have to smoke. Like a gang of drug addicts have more ritual than a Japanese tea party or a fire sacrifice in India, right? So no, that was not the solution either. So I went into computer games. That was a booming, expanding industry, and I could invent the whole world. So I could just make it the way I wanted. And that went well, too well, I think, because I made more money. It was like, so now I'm like the quintessential white privilege boy in my early 20s, making lots of money, no responsibility. I have a apartment in the posh area, gentrified area of Copenhagen. I'm a techno DJ and I'm dabbling in alcohol and drugs, but not enough that it really has any consequences. And the problem is I'm dead inside by now, because I feel like I've tried everything. The girlfriends, the drugs, the art, the making money, all of these things and I went to psychologists and said, I'm not happy. Well, have you tried getting a job and getting a girlfriend and, finding some No, this is why I'm here. That shit ain't working. And so I sunk into depression, and the company tanked after the dot-com bubble. And I was miserable for a couple of years. I was put on medication. Then I had side effects. I was put on medication to deal with the side effects. And in a couple of years, I was on so much. Nobody knew what to do with me. That's the truth, right?
Yeah.
And I was just burnt out, like heavy, heavy burnout. Suicidal, essentially. Paranoid. And one morning, I just woke up and decided, yep, I'm not doing this anymore. And what gave me that moment of clarity, I have no idea. But I decided to give away everything I had. It wasn't like, okay, why? I don't know, but all of these things are owning me. I don't own these things. They own me. That was the feeling I had. So I gave away everything I had. Friends, family, whatever was left, I gave to charity. And I left my apartment. And there were a couple of detours, but I end up in India. And I meet this Danish guy. He's wearing these bed sheets and looking all funny. And he says, I have a place I want to show you. And he takes me to this academy in the jungle there's a couple of elephants over there and a snake over there. And there's like mist. It's like walking into a kung fu movie. There's like this fog, because they use dried cow dung to keep the mosquitoes away. So this kind of fog is oozing out of this building, 3-story building. It was amazing. And the guru comes out. I'm invited to as a guest participant in in like a class on philosophy. The guru comes out in the even more bed sheets. I don't know. There's kind of a hierarchy there. How many bed sheets you got?
Different colors as well, or is it just white?
So there's different colors. There's either white if you are not a renunciate, or orange if you are. And so the guy who took me was in white, and the guru was in orange, right? I walk in there looking like a techno DJ from Berlin. Like, I do not fit in, but I never felt like I fit in anyway. So that wasn't really. He starts chanting some mantras, it was so powerful, that sound. Like, everyone is chiming in, and when everyone is chanting these mantras in unison, it sounds so powerful. And then he starts talking about the difference between the body, the mind, and the soul, and how the body is just a vehicle, and the mind is just a switchboard to operate that vehicle, and trying to please the body and the mind through possessions and positions will never make the soul happy. And I remember thinking, I have no idea what he's talking about, but I love it. Like, there was some part of me that just got it immediately. And then another part of me that was deeply confused, because there's a lot of Sanskrit terminology and philosophical concepts I'd never heard before. But I stuck around. And then, you wake up one day, you're wearing the bed sheets, you're chanting the mantras, and wearing the magic clay in your face, and like there's some markings that I guess I'm a monk now. It wasn't like, it was just, oh, all right. My schedule's pretty open. I left everything behind anyway. And so I stuck around for 7 years. And after a few months, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was happy. I realized that I've actually never known what it feels like to be truly happy. Like, people say it all the time, like, oh, I'm so happy in this situation, or I love doing this or that or the other thing. Yeah, well, heroin addicts love taking heroin, right? It's not, there's a layer higher than that, where you're just completely content regardless of what's happening around you. And that was mind-blowing. So that's how I became a monk. And then how I ended that and came back, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I think we come to that in just a bit, but I think at least I could relate so much to the part where you were like, oh, I'm trying out this, I get the new stuff, I get more money, I get maybe girlfriends, I get this and this and that. And then you still, like, that is what society tells you you need. Psychologists tell you need that in order to be happy. There's some sort of research that if people have those things, they're generally a bit happier than other people, maybe.
But that's because they're looking at it from the wrong angle. It's that if you don't have any of this, you won't be happy. But those things won't make you happy, right? It's that if you are happy and functioning, those things will tend to gravitate, and you will be able to appreciate them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, if you are in a miserable state and you don't know who you are, and you're looking at the world, I mean, literally, let's just gesture broadly at everything. How do we think it's going? People who are deeply depressed, most of what they say is true. It's just that they're only looking at that part of it. And so when you do that, girlfriends and money and interesting hobbies don't tend to gravitate in your direction. So there's a correlation, but there's not the causation doesn't go that way. It goes the other way.
So instead of looking at actually what I think science, at least the way I was brought up in my psychology science, is like they do experiments and look at what is different from these two groups of people. Oh, people who are having this certain amount of money, they tend to be happier than these people who don't have enough money. Ergo, the conclusion is, oh, these people must be happier because they have so much money, because of those things.
Yeah, that's a wrong assumption.
Okay, thank you. I felt that was wrong too.
Yeah, no, it is objectively wrong. So what happens is happiness doesn't come from possessing or having a status or something. It doesn't, like, those things don't detract happiness either, right? So what happiness comes from being of use. That's why as a monk, everything you're trained in is related to service. You always have to be of service. If I sit on this call and I genuinely consider what is useful for you rather than what will make people think an amazing guy, or what do I want to talk about, then I'll feel better afterwards. The more self-obsessed I am about this call, the more I will feel afterwards that I don't know about did I get to say everything I wanted to say? That's where the illusion comes in, that, oh, I should have done more in that, and you end up in this negative self-obsession spiral. Whereas if I'm genuinely considering what is of value to you and how do I increase our rapport, our sense of communion on this call for your benefit, I'll feel good afterwards. It turns out happiness comes from not thinking about yourself. It's automatically there. It's an intrinsic quality of the soul to be happy. When we don't experience it, it's because we're too busy considering possessions and position, and I want a promotion, I want the girlfriend, I want the this, the that, so if you are, and you don't have to know this to do this, you know what I mean? It's like going to the gym. You don't have to know which muscle groups are working and how a muscle works. If you just do it, it works. So there are people who have the ability to go to work and focus on their work, not about what they think other people are thinking about their work. They tend to do better. And so those symptoms will be manifest. They will be attractive to other people. They will be promoted. They will have those things and they will be happier. But it's not the things that made them happy. It's the happiness that made the things.
So when I talk to a lot of people about when they're worried, when they have difficulties, when they don't feel good, most of the times it's them in their head imagining the future or reminiscing about the past of what might happen wrong or what did happen wrong in their eyes.
What you should have done.
Exactly. The shoulds are very prevalent then. And
Yeah.
then the thing is, okay, how can I just change that? How can I change that the future is not going to happen and that I can let go of the past essentially so they don't hunt me in my dreams anymore? So it's all of that is centered around me, me,
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I'm saying clients because it's also me that I'm
Yeah.
doing
I
now.
mean, this is universal. This is how the mind operates. So, but you are not the mind. So you have to operate the mind. Otherwise, the mind will operate you. Those are your two options, right? You either control your mind or your mind controls you. And if you let your mind control you, there's a saying, if you want to make absolutely sure you have a shit day, stay in bed and think about yourself all day. Right? Because inevitably you will. There's two options. Either you go into what you just described, lamenting about the past or worrying about the future, none of which exist. Like, you can't change the past, and the future isn't here yet. So we're not saying stop planning, but just like dreaming up these scenarios that might or might not happen is not really useful. Or you will think very highly of yourself. That's the other diversion. Like, one is the anxious, depressive diversion. The other one is the anti-personality disorder, kind of narcissism way, where, oh, then I achieved this and I achieved this and I'm so good, and then we'll go there and I'll be a millionaire before I'm 40. And that'll just make you into a dick. So there's no good option if you just think too much about yourself. So a lot of what I do with my clients is teach them how to not think. I do my best thinking when I'm not thinking.
Wait, can you elaborate that? You do your
Yeah.
best thinking when you're not thinking.
When you're in the shower and suddenly there's the light bulb moment. So what we in the East would call speculation is different to like creative thinking or something. Like any good artist will know that the best art flows from not thinking. Right. Just be I almost said it like become one with the canvas or something like, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
It's like you just let it go and let it flow. Like I sometimes give these lectures and I'm talking and I'm thinking at the same time, wow, this is amazing. And it's not from an ego perspective that I'm amazing. It's from a humble perspective. This is glory. It's just like kind of flowing out of me. And you can train that. It turns out giving a presentation for your board of directors or something is easy, right? You
Okay.
just go in there and you don't, I mean, obviously you prepare and you work so you know what you're talking about. And then you just go in and start talking. But it's all the thinking that makes it difficult. Oh, what could go wrong? And what are they thinking? And they just want to, they're not overthinking it. They're just waiting for you to, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to learn in the West that speculation and analysis is actually not a good way to solve problems. Not when it's at the expense of observing reality. Because you can dream up so many scenarios that are very, very likely. I'm engaged in early stage business development now, and we have to do all these financial models and market research and projections. And everyone knows it's BS. After 6 months, nobody has a clue what's going to happen. Why do we do it? So that the investors can see that I know how to observe what's going on and what kind of value to put on it. Everyone knows that nobody knows what's going to happen. Like, where are we in 5 years? It has to be there, but we know that nobody knows, right? So we have this. I almost want to say addiction to analysis. It makes us feel good. Like, then that happens, and then that
Yeah.
happens, and then that happens, and it convinces us that we can control the situation, we can control our environment, but that's not true.
Gives us a
So
certain sense of like certainty, I feel. Like,
yeah,
oh yeah, I know what's
yeah,
gonna happen. And so I
yeah,
can sort of release a little bit. Okay, this is gonna happen. Next week is this is gonna happen. And my
yeah,
schedule is already planned out. Cool. I don't need to think about that.
yeah.
And do you think
And
it's a
then
habit that we fall into, or is it more like a yeah, so like is it a learned thing from our society now, or is it more coming from the natural predisposition of the mind that this is happening?
all of the above.
Mm.
It's an effect of all of it. You could say the two former you mentioned are side effects of the latter. So
Mm.
that we talk about in the East the concept of false and real ego. The false ego is the ego that says, everywhere I look is the world. I must be in the middle of it, so I'm the center of the universe. I'm the first person. Everyone else is second person and third person, right? And so that means the more I can control, the more I can enjoy, the happier I'll be. But we already established that's not the case. There is not enough money on the planet to satisfy one person, right? So the real ego is the servant ego. If you just drop that for a moment and try to just focus your energy on leaving everything a little bit better than you found it, so that whenever you have an interaction, hopefully someone, whoever that is, will in some way feel that that was good. That was better than not having the interaction. Sometimes that you can't, because sometimes in order to benefit people, you have to sacrifice a bit of the kindness, and there's a whole philosophy around that we can get into.
Hmm.
But in general, add value to the world, serve the world. That's why the CEO gets compensated differently to the receptionist. It is because their the responsibility they take for serving the entire company is greater. It's not that they sit around in a corner office with their feet up on the desk all day and boss people around. It's that they care about all aspects of the operational and the management and the corporate culture and relationship to stakeholders and customers, and they're involved in all of it, right? The president serves the country, right? The family or the individual, they serve their particular little pocket, right? But why is the president the top guy? Because he serves everybody. In an ideal world, we can then get into whether that is why our world is a little bit topsy-turvy right now, is because that's not understood, right? And so everything works really well that way. So yeah, so the false ego and the real ego, that core original idea which generates our whole material mind and our material body forms around that, is that I'm the center of attention, I'm number one. The more I can control, the more I can enjoy. Then translates into habits and translates into how you create consumer society that reinforces that, oh, you buy this thing, you'll be happy. You get this job, you'll be happy. And even the psychologists that we've touched on will say, if you get these things, we can see that this is what the happy people do. So do that, you'll be happy. Nope, you got it backwards. You have to let go of all those things and do good deeds without expecting anything in return, and you'll have access to anything. That was what I found as a monk, is that when you wear these robes, you can enter all levels of society. Nobody has a problem with the robes. I can go to the punks, I can go to the extreme left wing, I can go to parliament, I can go to the hippie crowd. Everyone will respect and listen. I traveled through the deep south in the US on Greyhound buses, and people would come up and they would literally have a wooden leg, and they would give me trail mix just because they didn't know. I said, well, I'm a monk. And the guy said, what's a monk? He didn't know what a monk was, but he gave me trail mix because there's something peaceful and non-egotistic about this completely neutral dress, you could say, right? So that gains you access to anything. I was invited to UN ambassadors' homes, and I've advised billionaires, because I'm not here to gain something, I'm here to give something. And ironically, that opens all the doors.
And one thought that's coming into my mind, though, when I'm personally stuck and notice, hey, there's the next bill of the next month is coming. There is some pressure in either the job or the family or some sort of thing happening. And I notice myself, but also other people around, that it feels so heavy, and like you don't have that much energy to actually give. It feels like that there is not enough that you can give at that moment. It also happens quite often when people are quite depressed or burned out. Like in those moments when you doubt yourself, or when you have those struggles with you and don't have that feeling like this life force energy is in you, how can you give then still? Or is there another way that you can suggest to do in that moment?
Okay, so when you're at the start line of a marathon, it's too late to start practicing. Right. So that's why we're heavily advocating that you have a daily practice of meditation. You read old books, because old books that are still around, they're still around because there's some profound truth in it compared to a tweet. Right. So this is why. It's not the thing. It's not the bill. It's the fact that you've been doom scrolling on TikTok for 5 years now. Right. So when I meditate for 2 hours every day. I do some exercise, some yoga every day. I have a particular, I'm the extreme example, right? I don't actually recommend people to have my lifestyle, because there's a reason I don't have children. It's because the parental element I get from working with people. I work with also alcoholics, addicts, and I help run a food bank in London for homeless people. And so I feel like in my life, there's enough suffering people. I don't have to bring more into the world. But that's just me. I'm saying I'm the extreme example, but what I do is I put this ability into the bank every single day, and that means when these things happen, they will shake me much less than they otherwise would, right? But what I hear very often is that people don't like, why should I? It's like, what's the benefit? It's like, so you just sit around doing nothing for 2 hours? Yeah, try it. See if you can do that.
Is it
Like,
in one go in the morning when you do it?
so these days, practically, I usually divide it into 2 sessions of 1 hour. Um, just because there's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning, like writing, and it turns out doing market research is a lot easier in the morning when you're not cluttered in the mind than it is in the afternoon. So I work like twice as fast in the morning. So I usually do my second session in the afternoon, sometimes even the evening, depending on how the day went. But under more normal circumstances, it would be up at like 4:30, shower, then 2 hours meditation, then at 7 a.m. I'm ready to go. But that also means you can throw things at me that other people would freak out about. That it just doesn't faze me, right?
And what?
And just
Yeah.
important, like subtle point. It doesn't mean I don't care. Right? That's sometimes what people get wrong about detachment. So you just don't care about it. No, 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 no. I care. That's why I won't let my emotional fluctuations interfere with me solving the problem. Right? And people in general have no idea the capacity of their own mind. Like you can 10x it. Right? It's an order of magnitude. If you throw out all the nonsense politics and football and all the social media and worrying about what other people think about you and what they think they think about you thinking about them, it just never ends. If you can actually get rid of that. So I'm not on social media, right? I follow politics enough that I can talk about it to people, but it's like it doesn't act. The problem is consumerism. It's not left wing, right wing. Like the right people are, now there's a election going on in the UK, and people are right that the Tories have ruined the housing market. But guess what? Labour is going to get in now and not fix it. Right? It's not going to get fixed because it's greed driven. The whole society is greed driven. The people who are upset that 10% of the country owns all of the country, if they were the 10%, they would act exactly the same. Right? So we're living in a society where old blames young, young blames old, rich blames poor, poor blames rich, educated blames uneducated, uneducated blames educated, men blame women, women blame men. Whatever group you're not part of, it's their fault. Right? The natives blame the immigrants. The immigrants think that the natives have stolen the wealth from the rest of the world. And all of those things are partially true. But it doesn't matter because the solution is the same. Right? We need a higher state of consciousness. We need to realize, not just understand and kind of agree that consumerism will never make one person happy. Not in the history of the human race has a single person ever succeeded at becoming materially satisfied. And yet we all walk around, whether we want to admit it or not, thinking if I had that thing or if I achieved that, then everything, all my problems would go away. That is what I'm trying to teach people. And you don't have to go all the way. If you just go 10% of the way, your life will be 50% better. It's arbitrary numbers, right? But when you're really bad at something, a tiny bit of difference make a whole lot of difference. And then as you get really, really good at it, you'll have to put more and more efforts into getting it's diminishing returns basically, right? So the amount of effort I put into it for tiny differences is not, for most people, that doesn't, right? That's not necessary at all. Just do something.
I don't know what it does, but it deeply resonates with me right now, the way you talk about this. this, because as you said, it feels so cluttered, and I can still remember this moment after my first 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, that I had this, like, I could look around and my
Yeah,
thoughts were not cluttered.
yeah.
I was
You can
calm.
see, you can
I could
see. Yeah,
see actually how
yeah,
things are and
yeah,
not how I project them to be. And I
yeah,
think that was, I can still remember that moment, how that felt, right? It was crazy. And I didn't want to
yeah.
talk to people again because there
No,
was
there's nothing to.
so much
Yeah,
input. Like in the last day, they had this opportunity to, like, connect with other people again, talk again, and to, like, not face the real world suddenly again after this 10-day meditation retreat. And I didn't want to. I just went to my room and stayed there because
yeah,
it was so overwhelming, first of all. And second,
hmm
like, I had this peace inside of me that I didn't want to give up again.
yeah, yeah. There's a term in the East called prajalpa.
Okay.
You want to avoid prajalpa. It's empty talk,
Hmm.
and it's basically what most people engage in 99% of the time. It's just they're just talking to feel like they're belonging. It's not really about what, like, like the guys down at the pub who are second guessing the football coach's decisions as if they could ever coach a football team. It's not that they literally, quite literally think they would be better at it. It's just the topics don't really matter. They just, like, we all want to feel like we belong, and so a lot of the time we're talking with other people to feel like we belong, and we're trying to say something we think they will appreciate so they will like us, right? So we're kind of imitating the service, but it's actually, look at me. Like, anyone who spent 30 seconds on LinkedIn will know what I mean, right? That it's just like the virtue signaling is insane, and everyone's playing along. And so if you have like a 10-day successful Vipassana retreat, you don't need any of that. And it's suddenly the contrast becomes so stark.
Yeah.
I've had situations with like fasting and extreme uh like level of meditation where it's like 18 hours straight or something. Um, and and I've just started crying out of absolute bliss, just the beauty of everything without like singling anything out, just the beauty of being alive. These states are by their nature, they're beyond what can be really explained. You can describe it, but you can't explain it until you've experienced it. So
Yeah.
it's natural for people to be like, yeah, that sounds a little woo-woo, but it's real, man. And it's pretty glorious, right? And the thing is, once you've been there, everything else becomes easier. Like that bill that you're not sure about, that becomes a tiny, tiny thing. They're not going to come and kill you if you don't make that bill, right? It's just call them up, have a chat, figure out something, and move on with your life. And then maybe a little financial planning, right? That is as simple as it is. But the fear of not being approved, of not fitting in, of not that thing I was feeling as a child and that led me in all of these directions, that's what's holding us back. Why? False ego. The idea I'm the center of the universe, the more I can control, the happier I am. We're constantly confronted with situations that we can't control because guess what? We can't control any situation. We can only control ourselves. And through controlling ourselves, we can then impact our surroundings. But it's a relationship. It's not like I'm Mr. Bossman in the center
Hmm.
making all of these decisions. Like, so I work a lot with founders and CEOs on these types of topics, and man, they're as anxious as the homeless people, right? Because a lot of the time, there's this missing piece of the puzzle that no, look, the company actually more or less runs itself. Just like the universe runs itself. It's always been here. It's always functioned this way. It's just your decisions are a little bit more important than other people in this company. But look at them. They come to work every day. They do their job. And So you don't have to micromanage. You don't have to feel like you control everything. You can delegate, and everything is easier than we think. But we don't want to get, essentially we have a problem giving up this idea that I can control everything. At the end of the day, as psychopathic or delusional as it sounds, we want to be God, right? Constantly the center of attention and things just happening just because we want it. But we're not, and we don't have to be. It's actually more fun to be the servant.
And in that context, what role do your thoughts play? Because I think they're very powerful. The way you think is, at least for me, heavily impacting how I feel, what I want to do next. Like a single thought can put me in a intense state of terror or intense state of bliss. It's crazy.
It's wild, yeah.
So yeah, please.
Okay, so first things first, what is a thought, right? Like, knock me out, who can say, right? So in the West, we don't really seem to have much. Like, we talk about neuroscience and electricity in the brain and stuff,
Yeah.
but that's not exactly a thought, right? So we say that a thought is what happens between an impression and an action, right? That's the bottom, like that's the bottom
Between an
basic level.
impression and an action.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's explain that. There is a certain, now an impression can be imagined as well, right? Like we can remember something, or we can see something. I always use the example of a dog because it works for our purpose. I see a dog, right, with my eyes. There's an impression. Now, the first thing, our mind has three elements, like emotions, intellect, and ego. Those are the three operating elements in our mind. And the first thing that happens is I walk down the street, I see a dog, that goes into the emotion bank, which is essentially a bank of all my experiences. I happen to have been bitten by a dog as a child. So there's a red flag that goes up based on the past. Now that signal, negative signal, is sent to the intellect, which comes up with options. It compares and contrasts. That's what it discriminates. That's what the intellect does. So I, for this purpose of, for the purpose of this example, let's say there are three examples or three options. I can go kick the dog because I don't like the dog. I can run away because I don't like the dog, or I can do nothing, right? So if you're very intelligent, you'll have more options. If you're dumber than a bag of hammers, you'll have fewer options, right? It doesn't say anything about which options you choose. That's why very intelligent people do very stupid things sometimes, right? So that takes care of the impression, the emotion, and the intellect. Now we have three options. That's sent to the ego, the sense of identity. Now, I used to be a monk, and I see myself as a peace-loving person, so kicking the dog doesn't really jive with my sense of identity, right? Running away doesn't either, because I'm supposed to be like detached and peaceful, and so that doesn't work either. And so doing nothing, yeah, that's probably what a monk would do, right? Like that's like a spiritually advanced person would probably just not freak out about this situation. And so I don't freak out about the situation. And lo and behold, the dog is nice. Like I've seen, I don't know how many dogs since that one incident, right? And I've never been bitten since. So, you know, it all works out. The action of doing nothing is then my action, right?
Yeah.
And everyone moves on with their life. So that's a thought, is something that starts with an impression. There's an emotional response to the impression. There's an intellectual exercise of coming up with options. And then there's an ego that decides which option mirrors my sense of identity. And so if you have a controlled mind, that becomes very smooth. And a controlled mind starts with the ego. That's the thing we were talking about before we get wrong in the West. We think the more I can speculate into more and more and more options. But the thing is, these are all imagined options. They haven't happened yet, and you don't know how it's going to play out. Who knows if I run away, the dog starts chasing me? Like, you know what I mean? The moment you execute, who was it? I think it's The Art of War, where it says the first casualty of war is your strategy, right? I think Mike Tyson said it better. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So our addiction to speculation, if I only analyze really well and I come up with all of these options, I can look at all of them, and I'm sorry, but you're more confused now than before. Whereas if we focus on easing our ego, that will then ooze into the rest of our mind. Our intellect will be less hyperactive and our emotions will be more peaceful. That means when I see the dog, it'll be a blip. It'll be a signal. It won't be like a full-blown panic attack. It'll just be, oh, just notice it, right? And that is the reality in my life today. It's still there. My mind hasn't gone. That's like spiritual realization doesn't mean you don't have a mind. It's one of the internal organs, like your lungs or your heart. It's necessary for us to operate. But it means that I'm not controlled by our mind. I control my mind, so it doesn't control me. And so that's a thought. And so then the objective or the role that thoughts play is just connecting you with the outside world. That's really all it is. And our addiction to problem solving, thinking that it's the mind that can do that, works on the wrong assumption that what you're incurring is problems. You're just incurring reality, and it's not always the way you want it to be or the way you predicted it would be. That doesn't mean it's a problem. Some of the most deeply compassionate people in the world have gone through hell to get there, and some of the most obnoxious people in the world have had everything they point their finger at. So the idea that, oh, if I'm just enjoying myself all the time, that's really what we're looking to obtain. No, it's not. It's not. We're looking to obtain a deeper sense of integration with reality. Once you do that, there are ways to do that. One is suffering. It's just pain, right? You just overcome the pain, whether you want to or not, right? But another one is these Eastern practices, these yogic practices that they are aimed directly. They are, we can say, a scientific way of integrating you with reality, not just your mental concoction of what a good life is supposed to be, but actual reality. And you'll see that many times the people who are trying to hurt you are your best teachers. If you don't take that personally, if you realize that the only reason that people act in an aggressive or demeaning way is because they they are controlled by their mind rather than controlling it themselves, then it's not personal against you. You just happen to be the recipient. There's a lot you can learn from that. And so the people that really are out to get you, they are your best teachers. Right. So then there's no suffering.
Yeah. It is. I love the part with if you don't take it personal, because recently for some reason I had so many clients coming up saying, I have this issue at work. This person is all the time mean to me, and I'm just not being able to put a distance up. I take it immediately personal. There is so much like intense fear that's being created when this person says I'm not working hard enough, when this person doesn't acknowledge me, when this person doesn't do this or this or that. And this, what you just mentioned, feels like the antidote. And also what's coming up more and more strongly is like, if something is really changing, it's usually coming slow and steadily rather than in a blimp. Like, it's not something that you can just buy a course for and then you learn this and then you're free of this feeling that you take everything personal. And so it feels like it takes a lot of time, but it also feels like that is actually a solving way of this internal feeling of, oh, I take everything personal?
Yeah. A couple of things to say on that. First, you're right. It's a daily practice, so it's a slow progression. But the thing is, it starts to get better immediately. So the first thing we think when we say, "Oh, it's going to take a long time. I don't know if it's worth it. I might fail." No, it'll work immediately, right? From day one, it works. So yeah, it's slow, but it's also immediate. And then, but it just takes time before you start to really see, wow, but see, the thing is, I work with these addicts and they come in having had a rock bottom. When you admit that you're an addict and you actually want to get better and work with someone like me, you are humble because you have been humiliated. You've humiliated yourself so badly. The amount of progress these people can do in a month is insane. It is way more progress than anyone I've seen in my monk years. Like, it's way faster. Because the monks, like, I had a spiritual awakening, you could say. But part of the reason was because I was in this environment, temple environment, and I didn't have bills to pay. I didn't have any, like, it was just my life was like one big, long Tai Chi movement, right? That is, people think it's hard to become a monk. It's really easy. Like, once you want to be a monk, it's so bloody easy, right? You just give away everything, you put on bed sheets, bang, you're a monk. But oh, now I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
About the progress that an addict can do.
Oh
And
yeah, the addict, right?
Yes.
That is bloody hard. Being an addict is the hardest job you can have. Right? You have to raise so much money and it's miraculous. It's like a mystical power they have. They can't explain where the money is coming from. And of course, they end up losing everything and they have the rock bottom. They come in and they work with me and they are ready. They have given up any delusion that they are in any way, shape, or form in control of their life. What you can do with these people in a month is mind blowing. I have one guy, like, there's a limit to how much I can get into detail, but the progress, like, he's a CEO of a big company now, and he was not when he came to me, right? Like, he was climbing the walls. And so, and it's not because it's about making money, but it's just like these things just kind of come. If you actually surrender and say, okay, I'm done, let me just follow these instructions, it can be very, very quick. The problem is we don't really want to give up. Like, we want to give up all the things we don't like. We don't want to give up the things we like. What about that feeling, that gentle feeling of superiority when you're giving a keynote and everyone's attention is on you and you know that you're better at it than all the people in the audience? You want to give that up? How about the feeling of making that deal? Like, you know how to onboard people. Your conversion rate is just higher than it's supposed to be. You want to give that up? That's what makes it slow, right? So, and then also, final point is that it's slow and then it's quick. Like, it's slow. You work on letting go of this self-centered childish ego, and it seems like nothing much is happening, but then one situation occurs where it suddenly becomes very crystal clear that if you hadn't put all of this in the bank, if you hadn't decluttered your mind and let go of these fears and desires, you would have performed very poorly. But now suddenly, oh my God, like, I am now in a completely different world. Like, suddenly it comes together and you see the effect it has. So it's both slow and immediate, and also the situation will come where it's like, Jesus Christ, man, what is it? You intuitively know how to handle a situation that would otherwise baffle you. And I have them, I won't say daily, but at least weekly, where I'm not even thinking, like I said, I keep saying, like, I do my best thinking when I'm not thinking. Like, I just observe, wow, that was amazing. And I don't take credit for it because it's not me doing it. It's just like intuitive. It's just, you just observe and act. There's like the gap between observation and act is so small because it turns out you don't need a lot of computing power to do most things in life. Even things like job interviews and market research I was talking about before. It's
Yeah.
just like, how many people are there? Why would they get your product? And how are you gonna convince them? It's really, really simple. But we tend to just overthink into oblivion, and that is exhausting.
Hmm.
So it's counterintuitive, right? You want to solve problems? Stop thinking.
I I got a hint from Ricardo that there was an amazing story that is connected to thoughts and the power of thoughts, where
Oh, I think
you know which one
yeah,
I'm
I think
talking
I
about.
know where we're going. Oh God. Yeah.
If you want to share it, obviously.
Sure. So I think the story, if I'm not mistaken, is that I know a person who spoke to another person in such a way that the other person had a heart attack and died. This is not recommended. It's not a story I share, and I will be pretty vague about it. It's it illustrates how dangerous it is if this type of knowledge is misused, right? So I'll use a different example which
Mm-hmm.
illustrates the same point. Um, I was giving a lecture, and there was a very disruptive person. Heckler. Like comedians have hecklers all the time. I have hecklers too. They're usually Indians who have grown up with some version of this Hindu. Like Hinduism is basically a million different mutations of an original philosophy. And so this guy had a superiority complex, and he kept quoting books he thought I hadn't heard of. And I could then explain to him what it actually meant. And it was just like, it was disrupting the whole thing, right? And so I just started talking to him in a way that I shut off all the doors that the ego has. And that will give someone a mental breakdown. So I, like we said, a thought is what happens between an impression and an action, right? And so you have these impressions that are emotions, the intellect comes up with options, and the ego then decides which option fits your sense of identity.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, the ego is false. It's not a real ego. He is not, in fact, the center of the universe. So all I have to do is feed him all the intellectual options that he would otherwise use, play those tapes to the end and show that they are not, in fact, logical. They don't work. That means his ego now has no door to exit. There is no door for the false ego to exit. As I do this, his emotions become more and more out of balance. It means he cannot seek validation in his emotions either. You've now trapped him in his own mind, and the guy started to cry. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to say, right? The only reason I did that, and I've since like dialed this down a lot because you're essentially breaking someone's mind. I mean, you could say in a sense he's doing it himself. Like I'm the fist, but he's running into it, right? But I would rather hug him, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's just at some point, a guy is so proud and arrogant and so disruptive that you just, for the sake of 100 other people that are in the room that day, you just have to shut him down. Now, the worst part about this was that everyone else clapped when that happened, right? Because it's like watching a magic show, and it's like they were annoyed with him too, and it's what you sometimes see in YouTube videos, like destroys the oppositions with facts and logic and stuff. It's not recommended. It doesn't. It just. But it can be done, right? You can, if you disturb someone's emotions and then you shut down the exits that the false ego would then use. And there's technique. If there's a term called, like, there's something like Vedic logic that is a little different to Western logic, but the principle is the same. You can predict where is he going to go. It's not that complicated. You can dress it up with fancy language and Sanskrit and all of that, but it's essentially a few different ways you have to play these tricks. You just expose them, and then he starts crying because there's nowhere to go. And in that case, the other case, the guy was overweight and of advanced age, and it kind of spiraled out of control. He had a heart attack and lost his life. So you can you can kill people by talking to them. That is the truth, and there's very, very few people. Like, this is not something that happens. This is not something, like, the listeners should not be worried about this happening. It's like, because what happens is, as you get closer to this type of philosophy, your false ego also dwindles. Like, your desire to do any of these types of things. It's like someone who's very healthy and physically fit won't necessarily go out and beat people, right? These are people who are already broken for different reasons. So we shouldn't ban fitness. You know what I mean? It's like, well, even though fitness will, like, make it more likely that you could kill someone rather than not being fit. But so in the same way, like, spiritual knowledge and spiritual insight overwhelmingly makes you more compassionate, right? And so there's an overwhelming likelihood that you will be a force for good in the world. And this example that I gave from my own life is, like, my immediate reaction afterwards was not, oh, I beat him and that was fun. It was like a sense of concern. I have to be careful how I speak to people. It's one of the character defects that I work on in my own life, is that I don't always realize how strongly I speak. I can get excited about something, and for me it's an exciting adventure into truth, but for other people it might be very disturbing because that's not how they view the world, right? So it's something that I always no, not always, but I try to keep it. Let's be honest here, right? But it's one of those things, right? I want to give up all the things that I don't like, but this is one of those things that I have to give up because I kind of like it. Right? I like having the thought of that power is kind of cool, right? And I guess that's also why we're talking about it. But no, it's really, I mean, honestly, it's not. It's dangerous, right? And so you have to be very careful. And I've had a lot of realizations about it afterwards. It's just like the power of silence, the power of just letting people talk and not trying to teach them anything, but just showing them that you care. Like the amount of listening I do with the addicts that I work with, there's a lot of stuff they say in the early days that's like, Jesus, I have some comments on that, right? But that's not what this is about. It's about just making them feel like they're not being judged because they've had too much of that. And so I've learned a lot from that, which is that this type of, in the East they call it left-handed tantra, mystic processes aimed at dominating people and getting sense gratification, like very elaborate sexual exploitation, and not exploitation of other people, but of like your own body, Kama Sutra, and all sorts of tantric sex rituals and stuff aimed at squeezing that extra 1% out of sex. The idea is, no, it still won't make you happy. Like, why are you're going the wrong way? It's Very, very rarely is it needed. And sometimes if there's an audience and someone is just being consistently disruptive and getting in the way of them getting anything out of this, you may use it to shut the person down, but be very gentle because if you overdo it, it can have serious consequences. So it's part of the responsibility of the training I have, right?
Yeah.
Is that I'm constantly hyper aware of where people's, we call them upadis. They are the identifiers, the things that people identify with that are false. So I identify with being a man. I identify with being from Denmark. Now the Euro Cup is happening. Why do I want Denmark to win? It doesn't matter. It's just I don't know any of these people, but I still on some tiny level I
Oh
identify
no!
as
And
a
then on
Danish.
Saturday, Germany is going to play against Denmark.
Yeah, I think that's the end of the line for Denmark, but never mind. I'll get over it. I'll meditate. But it's so funny because when I go to Denmark, I don't identify at all. I don't know any of the politicians. I don't know anything that's going on in Denmark because I haven't lived there for 15 years.
Yeah.
But the little Danish flag comes up next to the football team. Yay! It's still there. So that's a new party. That's one of those things. Like, what difference does it make Denmark? Or it's just a line drawn on some geography, right? But so back to our topic, it's like you have to be very careful when you start messing with people's sense of identity. Like if someone is a lawyer, they're working super, super, super hard, saying that being a lawyer is pointless is not going to help them, right? It's going to hurt them. Even though from a philosophical point, like being a garbage collector or being a lawyer or being the Queen of England or like, who cares really? But you want to always be somewhere close to neutral around people's sense of identity. You don't want to over validate it either because that makes the false sense of the ego stronger, right? So you just want to be kind of neutral there, and it's part of the training if you teach these things.
Okay, then that was a very fascinating and I think intriguing rabbit hole. I probably have a lot of more questions about, but I want to go a bit more into the direction to understand more what are the actual things that one can do if they are in a situation that they have this. Quite often we have this notion, okay, all the things what you said in the beginning, like I tried all of these different things and they don't seem to really work, and I don't feel like maybe fit in the job or the friend circle, maybe even, and then there's this feeling that something is off, something is wrong. And at least to me, it happens that doubt comes up. I don't trust my decisions. Is that right? Is that wrong? Should I do this? Should I do that? So, what are some of the tools that you would give somebody to the disposition to make themselves better?
Yeah. Well, there's 3
Okay.
categories.
Nice.
Yeah. One is lifestyle. Lifestyle is simple. It's just eat healthy. Don't eat hyper-processed food. Don't eat too much sugar. Don't eat too much fat. Don't eat too much meat. I'm a vegetarian, but I'll leave it up to you. But just like not too much red meat. And these are simple guidelines. Like if you live off of Coca-Cola and fast food, it will have a serious impact on your ability to think clearly and be happy. It's imitation food, right? So have a better relationship with your diet and your lifestyle. Get good sleep. Sleep especially for founders and CEOs and these types. My experience is in many cases, sleep is the untapped resource that they don't seem to realize that how much better their life is if they stop working late and scrolling whatever in the middle of the night. Declutter your home. Just have fewer possessions. Be regulated. Eat at the same times every day. Do a little exercise every day. Not necessarily a lot, but every day. So these things, that's lifestyle. Just have a regulated, healthy lifestyle. Don't overthink it. Don't listen too much to the experts, because they make money out of telling you that this is like a very complicated thing. It's not complicated. You already know what could benefit you, right? And then there's philosophy. Learn to think rather than speculate, right? So that is a little bit more tricky. That's why people work with me, right? Because if people today read the Bhagavad Gita, first of all, for every good version, there's 1,000 bad ones out there, which are people just speculating around the Sanskrit, right? And we are not exactly taught how to think correctly in the Western world, with all the impressions from social media, mass media, politics, advertisement. All of these things are essentially telling us exactly what we want to get away from. That the more attention you get and the more positions and possessions you have, the better you're off. Opposite of true. Not just untrue. It is literally going to make you miserable. And we have the data to show it by now, right? So try, okay, in terms of learning how to think, maybe a better piece of advice is don't overthink. Like, don't speculate too much about how do I, like you were saying, like you don't trust it. Don't worry about it. Just like a certain material specific situation won't make you happy, the particular specific situation you're in now doesn't have to make you unhappy either. So live and let live, kind of, right? And then the final thing is meditation. Do it every day. And you can find there are different ways, like even just going for a walk in nature can have a meditative effect, because the mind does have an ability to declutter itself. That's what happens when we sleep as well. Like dreaming is essentially the defragmentation process of the mind. But if you do it in a waking state, it can be more efficient. Like for me, 2 hours of meditation is more efficient than 2 hours sleep. I get both, of course, but so then you can walk in nature, you can do silent meditation. Guided meditation is a little, it kind of works. And then there's mantra meditation, which I do, which is mantra means, man means mind. The word mind comes from manas, from Sanskrit. Tra comes from triyate, to liberate. So it's a mind liberating sound. So we're locked in these thinking patterns, and mantras are like keys to those locks that unlock them. So we can take new paths. That we literally form new neural pathways as we chant these mantras, and it integrates the left and right hemisphere. We're not exactly sure if that's how the brain works, because we don't really know how the brain works, but in Eastern terms, it integrates the emotional and intellectual part of the mind with the ego, right? So rather than being 3 different boxes compartmentalized, it strengthens the relationship between them. So these elements start like sort of trusting each other more. That's why people intuitively become better at handling life, because they don't have to think about it. Because when you think about it, it's usually because you don't trust it. Like you see it, even people who are like, I'm working with a professional musician, a classical musician, and he's saying that if I think about what I'm doing, I can't do it. It's only by not thinking about it that you can become that good that you're a classical musician. Like if anyone asks him what he's doing between that note and that note, he has to stop thinking and then stop singing and then think about it before he can answer that question, right?
Yeah.
So mantras do that.
I went into, I think it's called like Vedic meditation, right? That's the direction you come from, right? Sort of.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could say, yeah.
Okay. Like,
for the purpose of this conversation.
Okay. Let's leave it with that. Okay.
Yeah, because we'll never get anywhere if I start explaining those things.
So funny thing, I did read a book about it, and was then for a few months going more into that. So I started out with the Vipassana meditation, so mainly body scan and maybe observing of the breath. And then went into that one, and what it shifted in me was it felt like two opposite meditations to me. One was a forceful focus on my body and always coming back to the body when I drift off. And then when I tried that with, I guess, a generic sound, I guess it's not as powerful as the sound personalized to you, but what it did was I was way quicker and way deeper gone and didn't notice I was thinking and was just floating away essentially. Whereas the other one, Vipassana, it was like, okay, wait, I need to focus, come back and focus, come back and focus. And so actually that helped me, the Vedic meditation helped me a lot more to actually calm, wind down, and be, I guess, sort of less neurotic, less thinking in my normal day to day. Whereas, yeah, so I found this like a really interesting opposition almost in both meditation. Both had insane effects on me. I love both. And when I tend to overthink or when I tend to be more in stress and distress for whatever reason, I use the mantra meditation again and again and again because it just winds me down so much that I can stop thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, it is considered the superior method in the East. Now, when you first get into it, that's not important. So the reason there is a resistance to one and not the other has more to do with the conditioning. It changes from individual to individual. I started with mantra meditation, and I was like, within a couple of weeks, I was up doing 2 hours a day because I'd heard from somewhere like this is what they do. It's like 2 hours every day, so I guess that's what you do. And I started chanting these mantras, and it was like I'd done it in a previous life. It was just like natural. I just kept doing it. And then I have an example of a young kid who came and visited. I was doing a lecture in Denmark, and I met this kid who came up to me. He was like 18, and he said that he'd thought about getting into the military because he felt like he needed some discipline, but he wasn't really into the whole guns and violence thing. And so he felt like maybe I was also very disciplined, and maybe that was a better way. And so I invited him to come to India and check it out. And I thought nothing of it because there's so many people who say they want to come and never do. And then suddenly I got an email that I'm arriving in 2 days, so see you there. What? I check my email like maybe once a week, because I don't have a phone. I don't have, like, I'm a monk, right? So he was coming in 2 days, and the problem was I was in charge of one of these, like a program for some of the elders. It's one of these programs where you have more servants and more dishes to serve than there are guests, right? So I was kind of trying to manage 40 people who were all freaking out because all the big spiritual authorities are coming, and people are just like terrified of making a mistake. Like there's so many little things, like a serving spoon is not supposed to touch the plate, and you're supposed to use this hand for this, and everything. 40 different dishes have to come in exactly the right order with exactly the right amount of time between. And it seems like way too much, but no, it's a practice. These people, they don't care, like the guests don't care, but it's to show, okay, how controlled are we? Like, how controlled are our minds? Can 40 people pull this off in complete balance where everything is arranged? Only if you have a very peaceful mind can you do that. And so I was in charge of all of that, and people not freaking out, and the cooks getting the right things. So I said to my boy here, who just arrived, 18 years old, never been outside of his home country without his mom, and now he's in West Bengal in the middle of the of the subtropical.
Wow.
I just installed him in a room. I gave him one of these bead bags for a meditation. I gave him the briefest of intros to mantra meditations. And then I said, I have to go. I'll see you in a couple of days when this is over, because I'm just so caught up with this. And I came back after 2 days and I met him. He was still there. I was a little worried that he might have run away, but he was still there. And so I went to him and I said, so I'm done. You want to grab some lunch? And he came up to me and he said, "This is amazing." What's amazing? Well, I was sitting in my room and I was trying this meditation and it just felt a bit, silly, right? It's like weird. But it wasn't like there was anything else to do. There's not like nightclubs or movie theaters or anything. So he kept going. And then he was like thinking about like what would his friends think about what he's doing right now. But at the same time, he already decided this is literally why he came down to try this out. So it makes sense to keep going. And then suddenly there was a voice saying, "You're crazy. You're saying these sounds. They're supposed to mean something in Sanskrit. You don't even know what they mean. And you're sitting alone in a room talking at the walls. That's insane." And then it hit him. There's two voices in my head. There's me. I just came down to do meditation. Now I'm doing meditation. That's it. And then there's the mind. Always like an unruly little child that whatever I'm doing, it wants to do something different.
Mm.
And whatever I'm getting, it's not enough. And whatever I'm not getting is the reason the world is out to get me. And the mind is like this infant toddler that's just always throwing its toys out of the tram. This is an 18-year-old kid explaining this level of philosophy to me. He's never read Bhagavad Gita or any book or anything. That was pure realization because he was in a situation where he just pushed through. Turns out he had been meditating most of the time for those 2 days, from 0 to 100 in no time. And he was like, you could see the light in his eyes. It was like it was literally like he had a halo around him. And he was explaining this very advanced philosophy. People who've studied the Bhagavad Gita would not be able to explain that to me in so sophisticated detail. And it was just from observing his mind, not from reading any kind of literature. So when we say that's the superior method, that is the superior method. You will not get that from any other method. And it was like the most visceral example of, because you hear this like, you can become liberated and know all philosophy simply from chanting this mantra. It sounds very hyperbolic, right? It's like,
Yeah.
Sure, and if I just drink enough Coca-Cola, I'll be happy and get all the girls, right? No, but it's real. This one is real. Like you can actually do that. The problem is nobody will, right? Because it's just the circumstances have to be just right, and so mantra meditation is considered the superior, but as you start out, it is recommended to make it a habit rather than trying to run the marathon on day one, right?
Yeah.
So whatever works for you, just put a little bit of it into your life. Don't necessarily change anything exterior. I sometimes say I went to India and became a monk, so you don't have to. Because if we remember, I was pretty much flying by the seat of my pants. I was very lucky I ended up where I ended up because I was not running towards, I was running away from. So it's not recommended that to do the extreme things. There are people who go on 10-day Vipassana retreats and they lose their mind because they're used to talking, they're extroverts. And so suddenly they're in silence for 10 days and they absolutely freak out and have to leave, right? So it's recommended to start small with whatever feels the most natural to you and then keep doing it every day. Make it a habit, just like brushing your teeth and paying your bills and doing all the things that you do. A little meditation, whatever the method is. So like you touched on, you could say a walk in the nature is like the mildest. It's borderline not even meditation, right? But it can have a similar effect, just calming yourself down and inspiring your mind to think of higher things than sex and food and intoxication, gambling, right? Then you have a guided meditation where someone kind of rather than a physical walk, it's like a mental walk that leads to a place that is more balanced. All right, a little bit superior there. And then you could say the silent meditation is where you're simply focusing on the breath, or you can have an external object like a candle, and then trying to just observe your thoughts without any sort of judgment. A little bit more challenging, but you get more effect. And then finally, you have the mantra meditation where you can just Google different mantras. The Om is a very well known, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and that then there's something about the sound vibration that resonates internally. So there you go. But just main thing is make it a part of your life. It's your right to have a half hour or whatever it is where the world is not invited to manipulate you. And to experience on a daily basis that you can be perfectly fine just sitting. You don't have to be bombarded with stimulus all the time. You can be happy without it. That is in itself very liberating.
All right.
Sure.
Perfect.
Okay. A little technical. Yeah.
What happened there? Did the headphones stop?
I have no idea because I didn't experience any change. It was just you couldn't hear me, right?
Yeah, there was a flickering of your screen, going off and on, and then your audio was gone.
No idea. I tried. I mean, the battery on my laptop was low, so I put in the charger, but that's hardly the issue. It's just
yeah,
I don't know.
Okay, all good.
All
Nothing
good.
happened. That's so nice because it records in the background, and so it uploads to the cloud in the background. So all the audio and video should still be there.
Good.
Okay.
That's the worst when you've been speaking for an hour, you realize you haven't recorded anything.
The other day, I think on Monday I had a podcast recording and I did a fantastic intro and I was like, okay, now the question over to you. And he started oh yeah, that's a great question. I said a quote of his book and with so much emotion in there. And then he started talking. I was like, yeah, that really means a lot. And then I noticed, wait, there's no timer. Oh fuck! I forgot to press record.
I find sometimes that I actually do better on the second take. But anyway, I think it's one of those things where you just kind of have to go with it. Just accept it as a fact of life.
Yeah, I had to press record, do it again, but it was so much more at ease because we had to laugh so hard.
Yeah, exactly. That is what happened.
Yeah.
It actually loosens up sometimes.
Yeah. So it's actually nice. But I was actually thinking, after you finished your sentence there, I wanted to jump in, and then the technicalities happened, and I wanted to stop at that point anyway and wrap up the podcast and have the outro. So to me, I think it's a really well-rounded conversation that we had already, and I think I'll just do the outro now. Trying to remember what he said before, and then have it in one recording. Okay. So I think with these tools that you just shared, and they're actually very simple. They're a few minutes of meditation integrating in your day-to-day, and they're not, as you said in the beginning, they're not very complex, not really crazy to do them. It's more about these inch change in a different direction rather than following the mainstream, the media, the consumerism. It's just going a little bit against the current, and towards that actual deeper, fulfilling sense of, okay, I'm here. This situation is not making me feel bad or good. It's actually myself inside. And that, I don't know, to me at least in that conversation resonated very, very deeply. And I think for everybody who's listening to this is such a want to describe it as just a release. When I breathe out, that feeling of release, because when you're stuck and when it feels like, okay, there's no way out, I'm worried, I'm doubting myself or whatever there is, and then I hear that, it's like, oh wait, there's hope. There's a way that has been practiced for thousands of years to actually get you into that presence and the connection with reality, as you said, rather than trying to control it, getting into the, wait, I'm here with reality. As long as I don't believe that I have control over it and try to fix everything and solve everything with my sort of intellectual mind, actually things are fine.
Yeah, life is a lot easier than we think. It's the thinking that gets us. We're not supposed to control everything. We don't have to. It's already it controls itself. And whatever you're worried about today, in a couple of months you won't even remember what it is. And if you put a little bit of daily effort into just in a kind and gentle but consistent way, shifting your lifestyle and your thought patterns and add a little bit of meditation, it means that when the big things happen, you'll handle them impeccably. And there's a good likelihood that it'll blow your mind when it happens. It's like, what the hell?
All right. And we didn't even get to speak about the AI monk or any of the endeavors that might be up there. But if now I want to give you the opportunity to just speak out what you would like to attract with what you have shared, like what would be a thing or a person or someone who might benefit from whatever you're doing. Is that clear?
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned the AI monk, I'm trying to put this way of thinking into an AI. Not trying, I have. And we're trying to get that out to people. So because that will be a tool for helping with the thinking, right? And hopefully shortening not hopefully, it will. If you use it, it'll work. Shortening the distance between that thought and then putting it into practice, right? The reason I have chosen to then stop being a monk was because I was on the fast track to becoming a guru. And I decided not to do that and to sit here and talk with you instead, because it's obvious to me that the tech industry is running the world today. The world is driven forward by the tech industry. And so I work with tech founders and tech CEOs on teaching them these principles, because then the future will be better, right? And so we're just trying to use technology to save us from ourselves, essentially, right? And it turns out with the advent of AI, that is entirely possible. It's like the opposite of social media, really. Where social media tends to break us down, AI can now lift us up. That's why I feel like it's arguably as important as the printing press. Forget the internet and television. This is like bigger.
All right.
So the future is bright.
That's awesome to hear. I am incredibly thankful for the last, 1.5 hours, the conversation that we had, the wisdom that you were sharing, and I feel also very humbled. That's usually, I think, a really good outcome of a conversation when I have this feeling. So thank you so much, Klaus.
Thank you for having me on. It was a great pleasure.
Awesome. You listened to the full episode. Your investment to a more calm, confident, and doubtless self. Now you can make a commitment to yourself and help others discover this podcast, simply by subscribing and following the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I hope to see you here soon again for the new episode dropping every other Thursday. Talk soon.